Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with the Pro Wrestling Logic YouTube channel and the World Class Championship Wrestling Review Series. As we move into April of 1982, specifically this episode, the 3rd of April for that year. Certainly a very bizarre program, and I'll get into why in a minute. I normally am very forgiving, and I admit this. I have a bias towards the I guess we'd call it kayfabe or old school era, but this program was rather disjointed and somewhat repetitive in some ways. Not particularly a huge fan of the program in that perspective. There was some good stuff, but just some finishes that were kind of lazy. We open the program with Al Madril versus Blackie Gordman. This is my first time to see Gordman in this environment. I'd seen him a few years later from some world-class highlights and seen him in some international footage. He was well known in Mexico, among other places, but first time seeing him here with Al Madril. They go to what I believe is a 10-minute draw. Very slow, methodical match. Some unique moves. There's actually one spot where Gordman hits what looks to be a modified DDT, which for 1982 is a pretty interesting thing. There's a couple of pinning combinations that were a bit different. Madril, who I'm not particularly a fan of, but the Texas fans certainly are, as he seems to be getting more of a reaction week in and week out at the Sportatorium, so that's a good sign from a promotional standpoint. But they go 10 minutes through in this particular environment, and the match felt a little bit long. A more traditional abdominal stretch by Madril, among other things, and he thinks he wins, but this is not the case. We move into a interview with Bugsy McGraw. He continues his turn against the people. He relates a story which Bugsy McGraw is kind of fast becoming a guilty pleasure for me. Relates a story of wanting a pony, and when he was a child, and when he does not get the pony, he says he broke his father's arm, which I just somehow that struck me as funny. Imagining a child who looks like a haired, clean-shaven Bugsy McGraw going after his dad for lack of access to pony just caught me kind of funny. Anyway, we move on to the Great Kabuki versus Tom Shaft. Interesting that Kabuki, somewhere along the last couple of weeks, must have sustained quite an injury, as he is wearing a cast on his left hand, which they spend the majority of the match playing towards for several minutes. In any event, the story of the match is twofold. One, Kabuki is incapable of using his left hand for the majority of his offensive maneuvers. Also, a couple of things of note. Frank Dusek, the manager of Wild Bill Irwin, among others, is the guest analyst for the evening, which WWE right now is doing rather well, and AEW is doing well too, in the regard of at least having a professional wrestler on the announcer's staff, or former wrestler as it were. That is a intelligent maneuver, because I think it adds a level of credibility to the commentary portion that a non-wrestler cannot add, because they haven't actually been in there. The analyst of moves and movements and strategy is added to in form of credibility when we have someone that's actually, done it. And I would always advocate having at least one person. I'm a two-booth guy myself. I don't particularly like three-man booth, and once we get to four, forget it, please. Hand me the mute button. But three-man booth can work in certain situations. But my preference is a non-wrestler who is your straight man, and a wrestler or former wrestler who's your analyst. To me, that is the perfect recipe. Of course, there are exceptions to this. Most notably, Lance Russell and Dave Brown from Memphis. They didn't need to be that. I think it was missing in Florida. I think if Gordon Soley had a wrestler to bounce things off of more often, I think that would have been good. But anyway, back to the match at hand. Kabuki is in a modified endangered position. Cannot use the left hand for the majority of the matchup. There is a note that Armand Hussein and Hart have joined together to form H&H Limited, a joint stable between the two, which where that will go will be interesting. But anyhow, Shaft, who I think is underutilized, at least in my estimation. I understand that not everyone can be a top guy, but I think it would have been interesting to push him a little harder and see where he could have gone, at least regionally, but maybe that's coming somewhere down the road. Regardless, Hussein is banned from ringside. Referee says there's too many managers out there, and he makes his way out during the closing moments of the matchup, tossing the great Kabuki some nunchucks. He uses the nunchucks while the referee is distracted. Key point here, distracted referee. Distraction finishes where weapons are used are good. Distraction finishes for cheating are good. Non-distraction finishes are stupid. There has to be rules in order for people to cheat. In any event, Kabuki wins for this reason. We then move on to a non-title match with Kerry Von Erich against Carlos Zapata. I feel like we've seen this particular match before, not in this particular iteration, but just the match itself in a one-on-one context. As is to be expected, Kerry does a decent amount of work over body parts, including work on the arm. He hits a few really good drop kicks. Zapata, even though he is an enhancement talent, for the most part does reasonably well hanging with Kerry for the few minutes they're in the ring. Kerry hits the discus punch, which he later used as a finish many places, including but not limited to the WWF, and gets the victory. Even the heel Dusik puts over the fact that Kerry was a world-class discus thrower in a earlier portion of his collegiate life. Anyway, Kerry gets the victory. Then we re-show footage, which I don't care when it is. I'm not a fan of it. I understand why they do it here. They are hyping the eventual match between Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair. They re-show from several weeks back the footage we've already discussed in great length between Flair and Von Erich, and Von Erich getting the visual pin over Flair. Well done here, so that when it finally does happen, that Flair does put Von Erich over, even though it's years later. We do, in fact, have the ability to remember that moment and remember the build and all that stuff. Interesting how different Flair looks in 82 versus even like 87, 88, and just a little bit leaner, thinner in the face, and just it's interesting to see the evolution of Ric Flair here. Texas champion Bill Irwin in your main event against the Spoiler Don Jardine. There's use of weaponry early. I don't quite understand that. Anyway, they go to a TV time limit draw, which is where I was critical of the booking in that, this is the second draw on the same program. I understand protecting the Spoiler. I don't necessarily understand why match number 1 had to go to a draw. Spoiler uses the claw, which I found interesting, with the Von Erichs using the move primarily. Spoiler also showing a great deal of agility. Not sure how long he's in the territory, but certainly he's a guy who can hold his own in any situation. I do believe eventually he gets managed by Gary Hart, although this probably is not the 1982 visit of the Spoiler where that takes place. But anyway, that is your April 3rd review. We will do the remainder of April and then go more episodic in the month of May of 1982. But until next time, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.